Hi guys, welcome. My name is Dave. Today's topic is skepticism and more importantly, why it matters. I asked the question, are you a skeptic? We have Bella with us in studio today. All the videos I've made so far on this playlist, Building My Worldview, I consider to be foundational, except for the one about weight loss. But I have sort of forgotten to talk about why I consider these topics so important. This is in a way a slip from my part. This is why I made this playlist in the first place, to talk about how I see different elements of our worldview and how it influences our daily life, our decisions and preferences, and our interactions with society and so on. And how our worldview in some cases might stand in the way for us to reach our goals or happiness or whatever it might be that we want. All videos on this playlist are about that. Therefore, I will talk about why I think skepticism is important and why I think you at least should have a relationship with this. This video will be listed in a playlist called Building My Worldview. This is not an educational channel. My aims are to further debate and awareness around the topics I talk about. All my videos are opinionated. I also assume you guys have at least some prior knowledge of topics I discuss. The background picture is from Ulriken, which is one of the mountain tops near to Bergen. A cable car was first built in 1961 going to this location and is still running, giving Bergensers and tourists an access to nature. From here there is an off-road bicycle trail going down, but the most popular is to walk the 13.1 kilometers across to Fløyen, where one can take the Fløibanen back down to Bergen. The trip takes approximately 5 hours one way. I also want to mention that you can adjust the playback speed of the video on the little toot wheel in the bottom right of your video window. This is how Wikipedia defines skepticism.
Skepticism, also spelled skepticism, is a questioning attitude or doubt toward knowledge claims that are seen as mere belief or dogma. For example, if a person is skeptical about claims made by their government about an ongoing war, then the person doubts that these claims are accurate. In such cases, skeptics normally recommend not disbelief but suspension of belief, i.e. maintaining a neutral attitude that neither affirms nor denies the claim. This attitude is often motivated by the impression that the available evidence is insufficient to support the claim. Formally, skepticism is a topic of interest in philosophy, particularly epistemology. More informally, skepticism as an expression of questioning or doubt can be applied to any topic, such as politics, religion, or pseudoscience. It is often applied within restricted domains, such as morality, moral skepticism, atheism, skepticism about the existence of God, or the supernatural.
So skepticism is an attitude towards information. Skepticism pairs up with critical thinking, where I see critical thinking as a sort of a toolbox for treating information. You can think of it like this. Whenever you encounter some information that triggers your skepticism, you can bring out your toolbox of critical thinking to examine it. But this form of skepticism doesn't, in my mind, qualify you to call yourself a skeptic. A skeptic is someone who recommends a certain degree of suspension of belief to all information. This doesn't have to mean that you can't act as if some information or knowledge is true and others are not, just that you don't lock your decision on the matter and keep an open mind to the possibility that you could be mistaken. There are two meanings to the word skeptic. The first meaning is when you use it as an attitude towards specific information, whether it is distinguished by type or source or one single claim, and the other is when used to describe someone who adheres to one of a group of philosophical stand collectively referred to as philosophical skepticism. This is how Wikipedia defines philosophical skepticism.
Philosophical skepticism is a family of philosophical views that question the possibility of knowledge. Philosophical skeptics are often classified into two general categories: those who deny all possibility of knowledge, and those who advocate for the suspension of judgment due to the inadequacy of evidence. This distinction is modeled after the differences between the academic skeptics and the Pyrrhonian skeptics in ancient Greek philosophy. In the latter sense, skepticism is understood as a way of life that helps the practitioner achieve inner peace. Some types of philosophical skepticism reject all forms of knowledge while others limit this rejection to certain fields, for example, to knowledge about moral doctrines or about the external world.
I fall within the second category, where I advocate for suspension of belief. This is what I will focus the most on in this video. I will go more into detail about that in a minute, but first I want to mention a third meaning of the word, which is scientific skepticism. I compare this to what I have in the earlier video Atheism number 2, the kerfuffle called agnostic principle. In science, it's generally expected that one withhold judgment until one have the evidence needed in the field one studies. This way of thinking has also been introduced to all kinds of places outside of academia within professional work. In my job, which is within the field of engineering, we are required to do rigorous quality control on everything we deliver to customers. Here, the controller is recommended to keep a skeptical attitude towards both solution and design. If it is my work being controlled, I want the finished product to be as good and free of errors as possible, so I encourage that the controller assume there is errors before they start the work. I do the same thing when I control my co-workers' drawings, solutions and designs. In general, I am expected to be able to give reasons for everything I say in a professional ability. If I haven't done the work of checking, I simply don't know whether it is good or not. These systems, that is more and more being a requirement in all kinds of places, are chosen both because they are rational and because they have over time been shown to give the best results. But scientists or others don't have to be skeptical outside of professional life. To recap so far, the word skepticism can mean to be skeptical of some information, and being skeptic means to be skeptical to at least at some degree of all information. Then there is scientific skepticism, which is a way of thinking or method within science that has also been transferred to other fields, especially concerning professional life. I will continue by explaining my position on philosophical skepticism and talk about why I think this position is the best and also the only position that really qualify you as a truth seeker. I will also touch into Pyrrhonism, which was the first skeptical philosophy. Along the way, I will also mention some of what I see as problem with selective skepticism and explain why I don't consider myself an existential skeptic, even though I technically am. In a debate on a Facebook group, I was asked, "Do you think your opinion is better than others?" My answer was yes. If I thought your opinion was better, I would change my mind to yours, and then I would think my new opinion was the best. Throughout my life, I have changed my mind many times like this, and I expect it to change many times more in the future. So I think of it as an ideal to see all information, including information that I consider to be knowledge, as up for debate. I visualize information that I believe in like being on a scale from 1 to 100, where 1 represents information that has just tipped the scale for what is more likely than not, and 100 is 100% sure true knowledge. But no knowledge ever reaches 100. If you have seen my video Intuition as it relates to knowledge, you would remember that I define knowledge as a belief that has been sufficiently justified, and that knowledge, no matter how sure, still is within the subset of belief. One can see it as if the belief in the specific information, the belief that the information is true, the belief that you know the information is true, and so on as distinct different beliefs. And then the first question you are recommended to ask yourself according to critical thinking is whether the information aligns with your prior held beliefs. So, if someone I don't know tells me they have a dog, I would think that that is possible and plausible based on my prior held beliefs about dogs and dog ownership. But if someone tells me they have a snow leopard, I would think that is possible since snow leopards exist, but it is highly unlikely considering that snow leopards are extremely rare and that they are a protected species. In this case, I would demand some really solid evidence before I believed it to be true. Most of the time, I do these evaluations on intuition. Simply, does the information feel right? I believe this is the same as if it aligns with prior held beliefs, only faster. This leads to two issues. The first is when evaluating information based on prior held beliefs is confirmation bias. This is how Wikipedia defines confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. People display this bias when they select information that supports their views, ignoring contrary information, or when they interpret ambiguous evidence as supporting their existing attitude. The effect is strongest for desired outcomes, for emotionally charged issues, and for deeply entrenched beliefs. Confirmation bias cannot be eliminated, but it can be managed, for example, by education and training in critical thinking skills.
The last thing that is said here, that confirmation bias can't be eliminated, is probably true for all biases. Biases are kind of built into how our brain processes information. So it can only be managed by education and training in critical thinking. In my mind, the first step is to make oneself aware that all of us are subject to all the biases even if we know about them. They don't go away even when we turn on the light. I think that an important part of handling confirmation bias is to be humble to the possibility that our prior held beliefs can be wrong. So I think skepticism is one of the tools to manage confirmation bias. When using intuition to assess whether information is true and you think your intuitions are innately true, you give confirmation bias free range without restrictions. In the intuition as it relates to knowledge video, I call this perspective that intuitions are true the gnosis hypothesis of intuition. This is in contrast with the episteme hypothesis of intuition, where intuition is recognized as a result of preconscious internal processes in our brain, and that is therefore subject to errors, like, for instance, confirmation bias. The second question you should ask yourself when assessing the truth value of a piece of information according to critical thinking is where the information is coming from. Is the source or person conveying the information trustworthy? And are they possibly subject to making biased conclusions? Remember, this is not just a question of whether they are lying necessarily, but about the fact that this source also might be mistaken, or doubling down on a belief resulting from a fallacious worldview. The answers are you should expect errors in all cases, and you should be skeptical no matter where the information comes from. Of course, there is degrees of it. Some sources are more reliable than others, but all information should be critically analyzed before you let it climb on the trustworthiness scale. But even the best of us probably let some bogus information too easily through from time to time. There are also biases described that is associated with this issue. The first one that comes to mind are called in-group favoritism, or as I like to call it, in-group bias. This is how Wikipedia defines in-group bias.
In-group favoritism, sometimes known as in-group, out-group bias, in-group bias, intergroup bias, or in-group preference, is a pattern of favoring members of one's in-group over out-group members. This can be expressed in evaluation of others, in allocation of resources, and in many other ways. This effect has been researched by many psychologists and linked to many theories related to group conflict and prejudice. The phenomenon is primarily viewed from a social psychology standpoint. Studies have shown that in-group favoritism arises as a result of the formation of cultural groups. These cultural groups can be divided based on seemingly trivial observable traits, but with time, populations grow to associate certain traits with certain behavior, increasing covariation. This then incentivizes in-group bias.
In-group bias is mostly thought of in context of how we evaluate others, but both directly and indirectly it also affects which information we are likely to be more skeptical towards and blind us to bad and fallacious information coming from groups we are associating with. This combines with confirmation bias and can generate information confirming circles within groups. In-group bias is prevalent in situations like conflicts or war, but also anywhere where there is a strong competition, like politics, religion, corporate life, and so on. One of the things I look for that triggers my skepticism is where there is an obvious and expressed us versus them thinking. Now that I have mentioned some of the problems with selective skepticism, we must ask ourselves, why do we value truth in the first place? Personally, I don't think truth has any value in itself, but I think a society built on truth, where truth is demanded, is better in that they are happier and more prosperous. For me, truth is a means to an end. This is my opinion, but I encourage anyone to at least be honest with yourself when thinking about this. Ask yourself this. Do you only value truth if it's furthering your case? Are you willing to stretch or twist truth if that seems to be more beneficial to you, to the group you are a part of, or even for the prosperity of humanity? My opinion is that society itself as an institution depends on a critical amount of honesty. A society that doesn't have systems in place to prevent self-serving and fallacious information from spreading will be a haven for corruption and in the end become dysfunctional. If you agree with me on this, you should also agree with me that the best types of skepticism is to be skeptical of all information, including information coming from your own group and your own previously held beliefs. But I don't believe in governmental restrictions of speech. Mostly this is because I don't trust anyone, not even the best of democracies, to wield that kind of power. This is why I advocate for critical thinking and skepticism to be taught in school from an early age. This way, the younger generation will be both better prepared for the information jungle that is the internet and for the skepticism that is expected of them in the work arena anyway. Everybody should, as a grown-up, be able to recognize a good quality control system from one that is rather designed to hide errors and fallacies, and to do critical analysis. And not least, I believe that skepticism leads to a happier life. I like to call the standpoint that all information is up for debate fundamental doubt. I believe that fundamental doubt is something every one of us do, whether one admits to it or not. The difference is between those who admit this to themselves and those who don't. For those who don't, the doubt becomes like an angst that must be avoided. I think this works the same way as those who have a phobia exemplary of elevators. The biggest fear is not really the elevator or to get stuck, but the loss of control experienced when the angst sets in. The angst is in this case associated with the collapse of society's truths. This is, I think, what is expressed in the cartoon Asterix. The Gauls have only one fear, that the sky may fall on their heads tomorrow. Or as in Old Norse religion, Åsatru, Ragnarok starts when the chain of Fenris is broken. The chain, Gleipne, is forged by the dwarfs from what is called impossible things. These must be seen as taboos: mountain's roots, female beard, bear tendons, fish breath, bird salvia, and the sound of cat paws. So how is these broken? If people start believing in possible things, I guess. So it seems for the Old Norse, their greatest fear were that people would start believing in what they deemed as impossible things. For them, this would bring about the end of the world, at least their world. When I see how afraid religious people are of others, even outside their religion, not following their rites and customs, but instead questioning them, I wonder if this is the same thing that their taboos are being broken, that they are afraid of. We are often talking about stuff that is no one else's business here. Well, the Old Norse was afraid of females that had beard. This is laughable, and the ferocity of the hates of some people don't correspond at all with the legitimation they give. I mean, there has to be more at stake for those people than just that they don't like it, to legitimize them hindering others to living their lives as they want, having sex with whom they want, or whatever that is no one else's business. Someone who associates skeptical attitude towards the core of their own worldview with collapse of the societal structure will have to protect it at all cost. Maybe this also is the reason why the first skeptics became skeptics, not in search of truth, but instead in the pursuit of happiness, to let go of the dogmas and the angst of them being challenged. This is why I wanted to mention Pyrrhonism. Pyrrhonism is named after the philosopher Pyrrho of Elis, who lived in the transitional period between ancient Greek and Hellenistic period, from 360 to 270 BC. Pyrrho didn't advise skepticism to seek truth, he sought happiness. And I agree with this. The foundational idea of Pyrrhonism is to suspend judgment on all matters, not to seek some greater truth, but to simply let go. I don't want to go into details since I feel I won't be able to give it justice in this video. Maybe it will have to be for a future project, but I thought at least I had to mention it. At times, Pyrrhonism has been considered synonymous with skepticism. This is one of the ancient philosophies that have survived until today, and it have had big influence on the formation of modern scientific method. In the ingress of the Wikipedia article about skepticism, there was a part that I excluded. This one.
Some theorists distinguish good or moderate skepticism, which seeks strong evidence before accepting a position, from bad or radical skepticism, which wants to suspend judgment indefinitely.
Where it characterizes suspending judgment indefinitely as bad or radical. I don't think this belongs in here, and at least not in the ingress. At least it's safe to say that the ingress wasn't written by a Pyrrhonist, right? If I met this argument in a debate, for example, I would call it out as poisoning the well. It is something to be against something and another to characterize it as bad or radical. But I guess the feelings are kind of mutual. From a skeptic's perspective, the opposite of skepticism is dogmatism. Dogma is defined like this in Wikipedia.
Dogma is a belief or set of beliefs that is accepted by the members of a group without being questioned or doubted. It may be in the form of an official system of principles or doctrines of a religion, such as Roman Catholicism, Judaism, or Protestantism, as well as the positions of a philosopher or of a philosophical school such as positivism, postmodernism, egalitarianism, and dark enlightenment. It may also be found in political belief systems, such as Marxism, communism, capitalism, progressivism, liberalism, conservatism, and fascism. In the pejorative sense, dogma refers to enforced decisions, such as those of aggressive political interests or authorities. More generally, it is applied to some strong belief which its adherents are not willing to discuss rationally. This attitude is named as a dogmatic one, or as dogmatism, and is often used to refer to matters related to religion, but is not limited to theistic attitudes alone and is often used with respect to political or philosophical dogmas.
For a skeptic, dogma is interpreted in the pejorative meaning, I also agree that it's either or. Either one agree that all information can be questioned, or there are some dogmas hiding in there at the back of the mind. You might also recognize the similarities in viewpoint between skepticism and what those who call themselves agnostics mean. What most people who call themselves agnostic mean is that they suspend judgment on the question of whether God exists. This is in contrast to what the guy who coined the word agnosticism, Thomas Henry Huxley, actually meant. According to Huxley, the agnostic position necessitated the rejection of all spiritual claims outright due to the lack of evidence. I will end this video by explaining why I don't consider myself an existential skeptic. I have already talked in length about existential skepticism in my 2 videos about the brain and a thought experiment, so I won't repeat it all here. I will just notice that I don't consider myself an existential skeptic on a technicality. It might seem contradictory since I have just told that no knowledge is at 100% certainty, which I stand by. The reason I don't consider myself an existential skeptic is because I am satisfied with the solution derived from applying Occam's razor to the question. Even if this by no means settled the question even close to certainty. We still can debate the nature of external reality, the reality immediately outside of self that we experience, without knowing whether that reality is the real reality. So even if we can't for certain know whether the external reality is real or not, the question is not important outside that specific debate. This means that where I put the certainty of other knowledge claims, like I have a dog, is not influenced by the question of whether external reality is the real reality. What I mean when I say I have a dog is that in my experienced reality, the external reality, I have a dog. So if you are curious about what I think about existential skepticism, you should go watch my videos about the brain in a vat. So what I have avoided to talk about today is things that I think belongs in the future video about critical thinking. For me, the 2 topics are tightly knit together. But I'm also interested in what you guys think about the subject. Follow-up to the content in this video will be featured in Couch Philosophy. I love to be right, and that is the reason I urge you to correct me if I'm wrong. This counts for all my videos. Please write a comment below or contact me with some of the contact information I provide in the description. Especially I hope to hear from you if you think I have said something that is factually wrong. Wikipedia should be sufficient sources for most of what I'm saying, but if you struggle to find sources for anything, please notify me in the commentary section and I will get straight to work providing it. Also, if you want to help me promoting this kind of content, the easiest way for you is simply to click either the like or dislike button, subscribe to the channel, and best of all, write your thoughts about it in the commentary field. All viewer activity will help on the YouTube algorithm to promote my videos further. Thank you for the view and have a nice day.